Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you all the books that I read in the month of March and those that I want to get to in April. So overall, March was a really great reading month for me. I feel like I'm finally back into a reading kind of routine and just kind of enjoying reading again. I felt like I was in such a big slump kind of in the beginning part of the year, so it's nice to kind of get some, find the enjoyment in reading again. And I think that has to do with some of the books that I've been reading recently have really kind of pulled me in. So I kind of read a total of 4 books, and they're kind of all over in terms of genre as well. So without further ado, let's get started. So first up, I have Violet in Bloom, which is like a little short story in the Bridgerton series essentially, and this one follows Violet at different parts in her life, following when she, first met her husband, marrying her husband, and all those things. And I feel like I wanted this to be a little bit longer. It jumps around with so many different time periods within Violet's life, and each kind of section was so short that I didn't really get to feel like a connection. I felt like this could have been its own story instead of like a short story. So this one I gave a 2 out of 5 stars. I wasn't necessarily blown away by this one. I just was wanting more. Like I said, I felt like because it jumped around so much that you couldn't really get any really good solid footing on what was going on. So I was a little bit disappointed with this. This is definitely one that I feel like would benefit from a full story or a full length novel, as opposed to kind of a very short short story basically. Next, I finally ended up getting to The Courting of Bristol Keats by Mary E. Pearson. This was one that I was really excited about because I love the Remnant Chronicles. That's one of my favorite kind of YA fantasy series of all time. So this is her first foray into adult fantasy basically, and I would say it's kind of a mix between ACOTAR and The Cruel Prince. So we follow Bristol, whose parents have tragically passed away, and she's kind of struggling to kind of keep her 2 other sisters, getting money in and kind of just financially supporting them. And they get this letter in the mail from a long lost aunt who basically says that she has some paintings that she wants to give to them that might have some financial benefit. But when it kind of goes off from there, she kind of gets thrust into this fae world, and it goes from there. There are definitely some interesting elements too in terms of this fae world is kind of having some struggles in that there is this evil force that is slowly taking over and that has some connection to Bristol and her parents. So I did really like that aspect, but there are parts in here, I'm looking at my notes here because this one was just a little bit crazy. It had a very interesting world and concept. I really think that was my favorite part, and the mystery of this bad kind of sorcerer I think was really interesting and well done. But I think this is kind of romantasy, I would say, but I didn't really feel that connection between the characters or really kind of believe in the relationship or romance. It was, I would feel very one-sided until all of a sudden the other person's like, oh, I did love you through this whole thing. But so it was a little bit unbelievable to me in that sense. So I wasn't really feeling that connection. And there were some pacing issues in particular. I felt like there would be some parts that, it was really, I was really invested in the plot, kind of the mystery within this fantasy world, and kind of the mysteries that we don't really get to hear a lot from Bristol's point of view, some of the side conversations that are going on that I felt was really interesting. But then there would be some parts where nothing would happen. It would be really incredibly slow. So I felt like the pacing was a little bit off, and it had the strangest ending. I think if you've read this, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to spoil it, but it had a really bizarre ending. It was just a little bit weird for a duology, basically. I think the second one comes out later in the fall. So I definitely will pick this one up. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It did leave me intrigued enough to want to see what happens, because I think this was essentially to lay the foundation for that second book. So I'm really curious to see what happens in that. But for the most part, this one was just, okay. Like I said, I give it a 3 out of 5 stars, and I think looking at the duology as a whole, once that second book comes out, maybe I will and appreciate this one a little bit more. But for the most part, this one, was just okay, but I'm definitely, willing to continue on, or I'm intrigued enough to continue on with that final book in the duology coming out next year. So this was a book that my library hold came in, and I really ended up enjoying it, so I also picked up my own hard copy after the fact, and it is by Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult. This is a kind of dual storyline where we have the present day narrative and then also the narrative kind of that was in the past, the historical storyline. And this follows this young woman who is a struggling playwright, and she decides to write this play about her ancestor, who was one of the first people, or first women published, one of the first woman in England to have her poetry published. And she also was kind of suspected of being one of the authors that was for William Shakespeare, or wrote under William Shakespeare's name. There's a lot of controversy around Shakespeare where a lot of his writing doesn't match up with the man that people remember in history, like how he was known at the time. A lot of people thought there were ghostwriters writing and Shakespeare was just the figurehead, so a lot of people assumed that one of them could have been a woman. So we follow that present day narrative of the kind of ancestor in present day who is writing this play, and then we are getting the kind of flashbacks to Amelia, who is the woman that people suspect, and she has a very difficult life in the 1500s. She's kind of sold off to this nobleman when she's 13 to basically be his mistress, and it kind of goes off from there, and how she eventually becomes a writer for Shakespeare. I really thought this one was a really interesting premise. It raises a lot of interesting concepts about how women's work in particular always comes second to men, and how the discourse is around Shakespeare's no woman could have written that. Women at the time weren't supposed to do poetry or write those type of things, and so, or how women are not given the same opportunities of men, whether it's getting published or getting a screenwrite or a play produced or anything like that, how that disproportionately impacts men, and how this has been kind of a recurring theme throughout history, even something that spans 500 years ago. So I did really enjoy this theme. I did think, I'm just looking at my notes here, I didn't really care much for the modern day storyline in here. I think this would have been a little bit more beneficial if it was just focusing on the historical timeline there. That's where kind of the main kind of showing these themes kind of present throughout history, it kind of ties those two together, and how somewhat of what the present day character is going through mirrors what Amelia was going through in the 1500s. But it was just, compared to the things that Amelia had to go through, what the modern day character was going through, I just was playing my small little violin. I just didn't really care for much. I wasn't able to really have empathy for that when this person is going through really tremendous things. So that I felt threw off the story, because when I was in the present day one, I was I just want to get back to Amelia's story, and I felt like this could have been slightly shorter. Like I said, it is over 500 pages, so it is quite long, but I felt like it could have been, like I said, if that present day storyline was removed, I think I would have enjoyed this a lot more. And there's something with the present or the past storyline with Amelia where it's just people are just dropping like flies, and this person dies, this person dies, this person dies, and it would just got a little repetitive. So I think if this was condensed a little bit to maybe a 300 to 400 page book, I felt like it could have been a much more enjoyable. And there's just something missing. I really enjoyed Amelia's story, but like I said, because of that present day narrative, I just fully wasn't invested in this as I would have been if I was enjoying that present day storyline. So despite all that, I did really enjoy this. Like I said, I wanted to pick up my own copy. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was really good. Like I said, I love that historical setting, but I think there just could have been some tweaks that could have made this, you know, a 4 or 5 star read for me. And the last book that I ended up reading in March was, I feel like I ended on a really good note, and it is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne. I'm sure you've heard everyone talk about it, but this is essentially a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, following Haymitch and his experience going through the Hunger Games 24 years prior to where the trilogy starts. And this one I think is my favorite book in all of the Hunger Games, series, next to Catching Fire. I think Catching Fire and this are kind of tied as my favorite books. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. It was really heartbreaking and just a really tremendous read. It shows you, and you can tell like this was not, this book was, the concept or some of the things that were tied in with this one, weren't, fully flushed out in like the trilogy. So kind of how she was able to tie in some of the things with characters' motivations, their past connections, some things that are like little Easter eggs that kind of tie in, I thought was really well done. It was, like I said, I really was invested in this, and it was really heartbreaking to, even though we kind of know how things play out, it was really heartbreaking to see like what was going on with Haymitch during this time. Is essentially kind of seeing how the kind of like spark of that rebellion was starting already rumbling, 24 years prior to when, Katniss ever came. So I think it does a really good job at showcasing how, a lot of the kind of rebellion and things like that take several, decades to kind of get to that point. And Katniss just wasn't, it was more at the right place at the right time as opposed to being like the chosen one. So I really like that. And one of the themes too in here that is really interesting is propaganda and implicit submission, and that's kind of a recurring theme throughout this, especially like in some of the quotes that are at the beginning of the book too kind of relate to that, and how propaganda kind of creates this submission from people where we don't really question what we're seeing. We don't really have that critical knowledge or like criticizing things to be like, is this the true reality? And I think it really ties into kind of currently what is going on in the US right now. So it's kind of very scary, even though this is like a dystopian world. A lot of the themes and like what we're seeing now is very much relevant from a global standpoint at this point in time, which is very, very scary. But I thought this overall was a good expansion of the world and providing more character background to Haymitch, who was one of my favorite characters in the series overall, and seeing kind of the threads and the parallels and little Easter eggs that be like, oh, I can understand why this character was so invested in this, or like this, like why this character said that in the original trilogy. So I think this one was really well done. Like I said, gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I love this. So let's move on to the books that I plan on reading in April. Like I said, I've been in much more of a bigger reading mood recently, so I'm definitely really kind of want to be keep the momentum going. So first up, this was a book that I started back in March that I haven't finished yet, and it's In His Kiss by Julia Quinn. This is Hyacinth's storyline or love story basically within the Bridgerton series. I don't really want to go too much into this one just because I think they're all kind of, if you're watching the TV show, I don't want to spoil anything. This one is just following Hyacinth. It's I like to have these as like something if I need like a quick easy read that's a little bit of good distraction after having read such a really emotionally draining and then like being heavily involved in Sunrise on the Reaping. It's a good kind of little palate cleanser. And I promise you, this book has been on my TBR all year basically, and I'm getting to it this month. I was able to get the library loan for this as an ebook, which always helps. I find I just read a little bit faster, and it is The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I've heard so many great things about this series, and now that I'm kind of getting close to finishing the Bridgerton series, this is the next one that I want to kind of marathon throughout the year. I've heard really great things about this. You guys are probably sick of me talking about it, so I won't talk talk too much about it, but I am really excited to get into this. And like I said, my library hold in this one came in today, so just with it's easier just to just slip my Kindle into my purse and when I read at work during my lunch break and those type of things. So kind of being able to switch between the ebook and this, not having to worry about carrying this around when I go to work or like travel or stuff. So definitely really excited to finally dive into this one, and you guys won't see this on a TBR anymore. So next, I've been looking because I realized I'm a little bit behind on my yearly goal of reading 50 books per year. So I have two kind of shorter ones in here that are kind of around like under 300 pages, so they seem like they'll be quick reads. First up, I have Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I believe this is the first book in the Regency fairy tales, so there are other books in this series. If I do enjoy it, that is always, you know, fun and enjoyable to find a new series. But it says, ever since he was cursed by a fairy, Theodora has had no sense of fear or embarrassment, an unfortunate condition that leaves her prone to accidental scandal. Dora hopes to be a quiet, sensible wallflower during the London season, but when Elias Wilder, the handsome, peculiar, and utterly ill-mannered Lord Sorcier, discovers her condition, she is instead drawn into dangerous fairy affairs. So this one I've heard really great things about. It's kind of giving me like Bridgerton in terms of like the London season mixed with like The Cruel Prince or the Folk of the Air trilogy by Holly Black. So I've heard really great things about this one, and because this is a little bit shorter too, I feel like it would be, you know, a fun one to kind of check off on my TBR. So I'm definitely excited to dive into this one. Next up, I have another short one, and it is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Morena-Garcia. I've heard people say that if you like Bridgerton, which, like I said, I'm currently obsessed with, this one kind of helps fill that void, but with some fantastical, magical realism parts in here. Says, they are the beautiful ones. The most notable societies, and this spring is Nina's chance to join their ranks, courtesy of her well-connected cousin and his calculating wife. But the grand season has just begun, and already Nina's debut has gone disastrously awry. She was always struggling to control her telekinesis. Neighbors call her the Witch of Old House, and the haphazard manifestation of her powers make her the subject of malicious gossip. When entertainer Hector Avier arrives to town, Nina is dazzled. A telekinetic like her, he has traveled the world performing his talents for admiring audiences. He sees Nina not as a witch, but ripe with potential to master her power under his guidance. With Hector's help, Nina's talent blossoms, as does her love for him, but great romances are her fairy tales, and Hector is hiding a truth from Nina and himself that threatens to end their courtship before it truly begins. I've heard really great things about this one, and I do want to read more of this author. I've read Mexican Gothic, and I really enjoyed that one, and I've heard people say this one is like around their favorite, so I'm definitely excited to go dive into this one. And lastly, this is a historical fiction, and I used to be so obsessed with historical fiction. I would read them all the time, and I've just kind of fallen out reading with it. I do read it like periodically, but having read by any other name, it's kind of got me kind of sparked with that historical fiction love that I always had. And this is a new release by an author that I really like, and it is Under the Same Stars by Libba Bray. This one is her newest kind of YA historical fiction, and it just sounds so interesting. That has kind of three storylines here in terms of different time periods. We have New York 2020. As the world stills around him, best friends Miles and Chloe keep each other afloat with late-night phone calls and true crime podcasts. When an unexpected package from Chloe's grandmother arrives, it plunges them into their own cold case, two unidentified teenagers who went missing in a German forest 80 years ago. West Berlin, 1980. In a divided Germany, under the strict eyes of her parents, lonely American transplant Jenny is suffocating until she meets free-spirited Lena, a beautiful punk rock girl hell-bent on tearing down the Berlin Wall, and the mysterious Frau Hermann, a kind old lady whose fascinating stories may hide secrets of her own. Kleinwald, Germany, 1939. It is said that if you write a letter to the bridegroom's oak, the love of your life will answer back. The summer that best friends Sophie and Hannah received their first replies from the famous tree, the world suddenly feels like a pliable, magical thing, as if it could be shaped by their dreams. But soon World War II creeps into their small town. Dreams turn brittle, neighbors turn on one another, limes bloom like poppies between the girls, and the forest is no longer a refuge but a dark wood filled with unimaginable danger. So this one just seems really interesting. I really love Libba Bray. I really loved the Gemma Doyle trilogy when I was in high school and the Diviner series, so I'm really excited to read her kind of newest release, and I like how it kind of spans across like a century on 3 different storylines. I'm very interested to see how, you know, that turns out. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what books you read this month and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.